In late high school, 1990, a group of my friends drove out to Livermore, California, down Arroyo Road. The time of the year was likely spring or summer, as I do not remember it being cold. At the end of Arroyo at the time, or off of a turnoff, was a pumping station for the local reservoir. We parked in the street. The reason for this trip was a trek to the ruins of a former mental hospital. Unclear if there was a more direct route, but Arroyo Road was desolate and rarely ever used at that point. We thought it would be fun and had attempted this journey before, but unfortunately, were never successful. I was driving one of the two cars, and it was after dark. The other driver and I got out of the cars and turned towards the hillside behind us. I was shining a flashlight along the hill and almost immediately noticed a tall, furry brown creature walking on two legs from left to right for about 30 to 40 feet. This was approximately 40 feet away. The other driver was next to me, and I asked, "Are you seeing what I am?" I couldn't finish the sentence before he eagerly replied, "Yes, I am." I continued on shining the light on the creature as it moved to the right, and then started up the hillside before disappearing. As the others were getting out of the car, the other driver and I quickly discussed that we wouldn't mention this to the others, because it would only scare them. We gathered all the flashlights and proceeded up the hill behind the cars. I had been part of 3 or 4 previous trips to the same location, and had never been scared before like I was that same night. Instead of shining the light ahead, I was constantly shining it behind and around us, looking for that same creature. I was, and am still convinced, that what I saw was a Bigfoot. So was the other driver. We later shared with the group, who dismissed our sighting as a bear or some other creature. Well, I'm here to tell you, it was not a bear. It was tall, dark brown, and clearly invisibly walked too comfortably on 2 legs. While we had about 10 or so people in our party, only the other driver and I witnessed this creature. Neither of us had anything to drink or any other substance that night. About 10 years later, I did some research on the internet and recall finding out that there had been other sightings around Livermore previously. I tried to find those details again, but was not successful. This occurred in James City County, Virginia. My 2 boys, ex-husband and I, were heading back to our hotel from dinner in Williamsburg on the evening of October 22nd, 2020. I took a left turn onto East Rochambeau Drive, which parallels with Interstate 64. At the time, it was a clear night, dark, and right around 9 p.m. I know for sure that it was after 8:50 p.m., and right before 9. I was hoping to get back to watch the 9 p.m. debate. My son made a comment about my speed, and I pointed out a 55-mile-an-hour speed limit sign as we passed it. I rounded a corner, and we saw a brief small glitter, which led my eye to see movement. I quickly could tell that it was upright, a bipedal figure. As it walked quickly from right to left, I immediately could see that it walked just like a human, but was extremely broad and very huge. The arms and upper thighs were so big that I could see the outline of muscles. The figure was blacker than black, almost resembling an enormous shadow figure, but much more solid. My lights only revealed more blackness, no clothing, just one wholesome, solid figure. I could see from the middle of the face and most of the legs. I saw no features, as it was walking, only showing its side to me. It moved very quickly and smoothly. I could not see its feet or the top of the head. It happened so quickly, in fact, that I didn't even have time to say look to my family who was with me, As soon as it stepped up the side, I immediately said, "What was that?" I was curious as to where it went, and as I passed the area, I could clearly see that it went into the woods. It's important to know there were no cars, people, or anything else on the road. There was one little house further down the road that did have a front porch light on. I keep trying to understand the distance from my car to the area that it walked in the woods, trying to understand the height, but what I saw was huge. No way any human could be as huge, tall, or that broad. Again, it was black, so black that my lights didn't even reveal any details, which is odd. My children were completely freaked out, so I did not stop. I've since returned twice to the area to look at that road and also surroundings. It's important to note that the road was dark, and the figure was black, so black that I could easily see the shape and walking. Even though there was a quick small light glimmer that drew my attention, which I could then make out this enormous figure, it did not turn to look at our car. I'm still searching to see if there's other stories. I've gone back to this location 2 different times to observe the land, distance, and trying to determine the height and where it was coming from and why it might have been traveling in that area. Back in February of 2011, I was traveling down Highway 95 between Potlatch, Idaho and Tenst, Idaho, right around midnight, and somewhere between that and 2 a.m. It was all wooded pasture off to the right side of the highway, and open grass pasture and creek on the left, which is also the driver's side of the highway. I was busy driving into a curve before a wide-ganned private road, when approximately about 50 feet in front of me, I saw a very large, dark form walk straight across the highway, right to left. I assumed at the time it was a human, so I slowed to a full stop in the middle of the highway, which at the time was empty both directions, except for me. It was at this point that I realized that I could not see this person off the side of the highway or out in the grass pasture to my left. I did indeed have my high beams on, and the area was very well lit from that. I then developed an awful sense of dread, and immediately hit the gas and headed for home, which was only about 5 or 6 miles away at that point. I was so bothered by this event that I continually checked my rearview mirror, expecting to see something horrible or have something horrible happen to me. Once I got home, I bolted into the house, turned on every light, and woke up my entire family. They all just kind of laughed it off, but my dog crawled up into my lap and whined and cried at me and wouldn't leave my side for some strange reason. I didn't sleep at all that night, and even tried avoiding driving that highway so late. It wasn't until later that I really started to process the details of what happened. I realized that I saw somebody, very distinctly bipedal, walk across the highway. There was no mistaking that detail. I can still remember the walking motion of the legs and the slight swinging motion of the arms. I also realized that while I had my high beams on the figure, it was completely and utterly black. It was weird not to have any reflection from clothing, shoes, or even a shadow thrown onto the highway. The other thing that very much bothered me was that I never took my eyes off what happened, but somewhere between the figure walking across the highway and walking off the side, it disappeared. I definitely should have been able to see something walking down the side of the ditch or into the pasture, but it was empty. It took me quite some time to come to terms with what happened, and even longer before I finally admitted to myself that it may have indeed been a Sasquatch-related sighting. In fact, I've recently been compelled to report this specific sighting due to the fact that recently, a woman claimed to have seen a Sasquatch right before hitting a deer in almost the exact same area in a similar time frame. But she's been made into a joke by the local news. Go figure. I don't know if she actually did see one, but I find it a very, very odd coincidence that it happened in that same area of highway and in the same time frame. Maybe there's something there. There are other stories, though. I guess the area is rife with people who talk behind their hands about Sasquatch sightings, but rarely ever go public. I'm not surprised. In fact, recently, in March, one woman reported seeing a Sasquatch before hitting a deer in the same location that I had my experience years before. A very different lady than the one I just mentioned. There's more happening here than you would imagine. At the time of this sighting, I was 17 years old, and the year was 1981. A very different time than today. No cell phones, no devices to have in front of your face, and nothing but forcible human contact. A much better time, but at that young tender age, my life would be forever changed when I saw something in the woods that at the time I could not explain, but would only further accept as what I would call a Bigfoot. At the time, I was out exploring in the backwoods, probably looking for arrowheads or anything that would interest a 17-year-old boy. I think I was just trying to find something to do, to avoid going back home to my abusive, alcoholic father. Anything to keep me out of the house. The woods at the time were very much my safe spot, until this happened, and made me even more uncomfortable being in either location, home or forest. I was messing with a stick, probably trying to carve a spear, if I can recall correctly, when I looked up and noticed a strange face looking at me from the tree line. At first, I wasn't exactly sure what it was, but then it moved, as if it was curiously watching me. That's when I realized this was not a person, but a thing. Some strange unidentifiable animal. That's when I then realized that this animal was built like a linebacker and easily 8 to 9 feet tall, covered in thick brown woolly hair. Its face looked very much like a human. A large nose, just like ours, a very strong brow line, and very thin lips. The eyes were dark, and I couldn't exactly make out what they were. But it stared at me and observed me. I was very intrigued, as much as I was scared. But something told me, deep in my gut, that this was dangerous. Then, as it continued to stare at me, I began to get the sensation that I was in trouble. That fight or flight sense that tells you are in grave danger. Then I began to hear rustling from all around me, and I knew I was not alone. I knew in that moment I was surrounded. Then, as soon as I looked back to this creature from looking around me, it was gone, and I heard more rustling from all around me. There were multiple of these things, and they were circling me, getting closer. I took out of there like a bat out of hell, and I dealt with my abusive drunken father the rest of that day, week, even months, not going back to that same spot in the woods, for fear of whatever that thing was. Fast forward 10 years to around 91, 92, and I learned from some friends that I'd acquired recently at the time that my story was that of a Bigfoot